I'm Derek Walker, the pastor of the Oxford Bible Church, and we are in a special series on the temples of God. Today we're going to get to Mount Sinai and the Tabernacle and have a special look at that. So far in the series, we've seen that temples are generally associated with mountains. And you see, the height of a mountain is symbolic of holiness. And the origin of this concept is actually the temple, the heavenly temple, which is called a mountain. It's shaped like a mountain. Now, the earthly temple was on Mount Zion, but this was just an image or a reflection of the heavenly temple, which is on the heavenly Mount Zion. We read about that in Hebrews 12. It says, "You have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, registered in heaven as citizens, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant." And since a temple, you see, is the dwelling place of God, where God dwells with his people, then by definition, the heavenly Jerusalem, which is Mount Zion, is, in fact, the heavenly temple of God. The whole of heaven, in other words, is the special dwelling place of God. Jesus called it the Father's house. And so the heavenly temple is really the whole of heaven. And its central feature is a mountain called Mount Zion. And it's also a city, the heavenly Jerusalem. And this is the everlasting home of the redeemed men and angels, as well as the home of God, God's presence. And we see this heavenly mountain city clearly revealed in the last two chapters of the Bible. It says in Revelation 21, "Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." In other words, the city is the place where Christ and his bride will dwell together forever. "And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God." In other words, the city is the eternal dwelling place of God with man, the heavenly temple of God. And then in verse 9 it says, "Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife." "And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and he showed me the great city." So you see, this city is shaped like a mountain. The holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. This city, you see, is the heavenly temple of God, shining with the glory of God. And then in verse 16 says, "The city is laid out as a square, its length as great as its breadth, as a square base. And he measured the city with a reed, 12,000 furlongs, which is about 1,500 miles or so. And the most amazing thing is that the height is also 1,500 miles, because it says the length, breadth, and height are equal. And so some think it's a cube, but the Bible says it's shaped like a mountain. So it actually goes to a peak, and the throne of God is at the peak. In other words, it's shaped as a square-based pyramid. Verse 22 says, "But I saw no temple in it." The reason is the whole thing is the temple of God, the dwelling place of God. God's throne is at the peak, the high point of the mountain, the Holy of Holies, and from there, God's river of life flows to water the whole mountain city, including the tree of life, which fills the city, manifesting as many trees, all bringing forth their fruit. We read that in Revelation 22. "He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and the Lamb. In the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations, and there will be no more curse. But the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, in the city," actually at the peak, "and his servants will serve him, and they will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads." And so this mountain city, where God's servants dwell in his presence, also has the characteristics of a garden because of the tree of life and the river that's everywhere. So it is a mountain garden city. Now, this heavenly mount is described in Ezekiel 28, which tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven to earth. It says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God. You are the anointed cherub who covers. I, God, established you. You are on the holy mountain of God. You sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. And I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. I cast you to the ground. Literally, I cast you to the earth. And there's a parallel account of this in Isaiah 14, saying, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, to the earth. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. Now this is literally, the heaven I go up. This is what Satan said. The heaven I go up. In other words, he was already in heaven, but he wanted to climb to a higher place in heaven. To ascend actually to the highest place, which was God's throne. I will exalt my throne, he says, above the stars, above the other angels. And it says, I will also sit on top of the mount of the congregation. So on this mountain, the congregation, God's servants live on this mountain, but he wanted his throne to be seated, to be enthroned on the top of this mountain where God's throne is. He also said, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, the glory clouds. I will be like the Most High. He wanted to be seated in God's position at the top of this mount, which was the throne room. So that proves that the throne is at the top of this holy mountain of God in heaven. Other scriptures talk about the holy mount in heaven, his heavenly temple, God's primary dwelling place. And although these scriptures could have some application to the earthly temple on the earthly Mount Zion, they primarily apply to his heavenly temple on the heavenly Mount Zion. For example, Psalm 15 says, Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? Notice the heavenly tabernacle or temple is identified with the holy hill or mountain. Psalm 22:3, who may ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who may stand in his holy place? So the heavenly temple, the holy place, is identified as being the holy hill, his holy mountain. And then the answer to the question is, who can ascend into heaven? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully. Psalm 3:4. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. And it's talking about his holy hill in heaven, because this was actually spoken by David before there was even a temple. And so he cried to God in his holy hill in heaven. That's the heavenly temple. Psalm 2:1 is a classic. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. Notice God's response. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. And this is what God says. Yet I have set my king, that's Jesus, on my holy hill of Zion. This is talking about the heavenly holy hill, the heavenly throne of God. This is talking about the fact that Jesus ascended and sat at the right hand of God. He is the King, the Son of Man, who is the Son of God. He's been enthroned on the holy hill of Zion. That's the heavenly temple. And then Christ himself speaks and explains how that happened. I will declare the decree. This is the decree that God spoke over Jesus when he raised him from the dead and exalted him. The Lord has said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Now we know that was fulfilled at the resurrection, because Acts 13:33 says, God has fulfilled this for us, their children, in that he raised up Jesus, as it is also written in the second Psalm, you are my son, today I've begotten you. So that at the resurrection, God spoke those words, and he was begotten and resurrected from the dead. And then he was given all authority in heaven and earth, because he goes on and says, ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. Remember, Jesus said, all authority in heaven and earth is given to me. And he says, you will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. This is the ascension of Christ, when he was given the name above every name, and he was exalted far above all principalities and powers, and sat down at the right hand of God, the God-man Jesus Christ. And God has established him on his holy hill as king. Praise God. He has been given all authority. Daniel 7 also talks about the Son of Man coming to the throne and receiving everlasting dominion over all the nations of the earth. And that happened at the ascension of Christ. And then, so the response to that now, in verse 10, now therefore be wise, O kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. In other words, submit to God, submit to Christ, and rejoice in his salvation. Kiss the Son, it says, that which means worship the Son. Worship him, lest he be angry and you perish in the way. For when his wrath is kindled but a little, blessed are all those who put their trust in him. In other words, people have a choice now. If you put your trust in him, you'll be blessed with eternal life. That's the gospel. But if you do not worship the Son and receive him as Lord, you will come under his judgment. He will be angry. Well, these are examples of the heavenly temple being described as God's holy hill, his holy mountain. The earthly temples are images of the heavenly temple, and we saw that the first one was Eden, with Mount Eden on the west side. From its summit, which is like the Holy of Holies, flowed a river down into the Garden of Eden on the mountain slope, like a plateau on the mountain slope, which is the holy place where God put Adam and Eve to live and serve on, and to serve him. And from the garden, this river divided into 4 main rivers, which flowed out. And by the way, that's just like the heavenly temple, because from the peak, the throne flows the river of life, and since the city is 4-sided, it flows out in 4 main directions. And this river from Eden watered the rest of Eden, which was further east again. That's like the outer court, and then it watered, these rivers watered the rest of the earth. And so Eden was on high ground, holy ground, where God's presence was in a special way. In other words, Eden was God's first earthly temple. And future earthly temples were patterned after Eden, such as its mountain location, being a garden sanctuary, the presence of cherubim, the 3 levels of holiness, the Holy of Holies, the holy place, and the outer court. All of these are built into the design of future temples. And the west-east orientation, with the holiest place in the west, going away from the presence of God on the east. So to approach God, you go from east to west, and you will see that in future temples. We also see the association of mountains with temples in the next earthly temple, which is the Tabernacle at Mount Sinai. When Moses fled from Pharaoh when he was 40, he went to Midian, and that's in Saudi Arabia, and married Jethro's daughter and became a shepherd. Let's read that. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Notice, this is a holy mountain. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. He said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. We're going to see Mount Sinai becomes a temple of God for a time. This is a holy place. And he tells Moses to deliver the Israelites. And then he says, I will certainly be with you, and this will be a sign that I've sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. And so notice, Mount Sinai is called the mountain of God. This mountain is a holy place, like a temple of God, where Israel will worship and serve him in his presence. Now it must have been in Midian, which is in the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia, the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba. Jethro lived in Al-Bad, which is an oasis town. Now the main mountain range near Al-Bad in Midian is the Jebel El-Lawz mountain range, which means mountain of almonds. And one mountain in particular, Jebel Makla, means the burnt mountain, is a strong candidate for the real Mount Sinai, because it looks like the whole top has been burnt with fire. In any case, the New Testament confirms Mount Sinai is in Arabia, in Galatians 4:25. And the context of that is that Paul is relating Mount Sinai to Hagar and Ishmael, who lived east of the Sinai Peninsula. And so that confirms that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. He's referring to Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, not in the Sinai Peninsula, where the traditional Mount Sinai is, which was wrongly identified by Helena, mother of Constantine, in the 4th century. So don't let that confuse you. After the Exodus, Israel travelled across the Sinai Peninsula, then crossed the Gulf of Aqaba, where the Egyptian army was drowned. Then they travelled to the mountain of God in Midian, near where Jethro lived. So that's why Exodus 18:5 says, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Then it says, so Israel camped there before the mountain, and Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. Notice that God now has made this mountain his temporary dwelling place or temple, so that God actually lived and spoke from the top of Mount Sinai. That's like the Holy of Holies. And Moses approached God by climbing the mountain. God told Moses, in verse 11, let them be ready for the 3rd day, for on the 3rd day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people, and you will set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Because of the holiness of the temple, which comes from the presence of God there, the people were not allowed access. And then it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down on Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. Also let the priests who come near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. See, the priests actually had closer access to the base of the mountain where the altar was, and the rest of the people had to go further away. But even the priests were in danger if they were not consecrated. And then in Exodus 20, God spoke the 10 commandments in the hearing of all the people. And it says, now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood far off. And then they said to Moses, you speak with us and we'll hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. They are so aware of the power and the majesty of God. And so the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, thus shall you say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I talked with you from heaven. They heard God's voice speaking from the Holy of Holies at the top of the mountain. And then God gave Moses more instructions on the mountain. And that's chapters Exodus 20 to 23. And then they laid plans, God, for the next meeting. That's in Exodus 24:1. Now God said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. And Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people go up with him. So notice there are different levels of holiness. The people are not allowed even near the base of the mountain. Moses alone was able to go right up near the Lord, who was at the summit in the Holy of Holies, but the 70 elders and Aaron could go halfway up, and which is like the holy place. It's like the plateau. It's the holy area. And then the priests would operate at the base of the mount where the altar was. and the rest of the people had to stay outside the boundary stone. So there are different levels of holiness. And at this point, the people affirmed the covenant. And so it says, Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said we will do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. The altar is always in the outer court. And 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. So the altar is always an essential part of any temple if there's sin, because you can't approach God without a sacrifice, without the blood. This altar at the foot of the mountain was the outer court of this temple. Then it says he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has said we'll do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, saying, this is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you according to these words. So this is when the actual covenant was made. Then Moses went up, as also Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. But on the nobles of the children of Israel he did not lay his hand. So they saw God, and they ate and drank. And this is the representatives of Israel, the leaders, having a covenant meal with God. And this was halfway up the mountain, as we'll see, in the level place there on Mount Sinai. There's a level place where they ate with God in the holy place. But only Moses could go up higher to the Holy of Holies, where the full glory of God was. And that's where God met with Moses, higher up, and gave his commandments. And so we see the three levels of the temple: the Holy of Holies at the top, the level place, which was the holy place, halfway up, and the outer court at the base. And then God said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I'll give you the tablets of stone and the law and the commandments which I've written, that you may teach them. So Moses arose with his servant Joshua, and Moses went up the mountain of God. And then he said to the elders, wait here for us, that's at the plateau halfway up, until we come back to you. Then Moses went up into the mountain to the top, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai. And it says that he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. So Moses went into the midst of the cloud and went up into the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And during this time he gave all the instructions for the tabernacle, from chapter 25 to 31, finished by saying, and then at the end of that, he wrote the 10 Commandments in the tablets of stone. And in the instructions of the tabernacle, it's clear that it also would have an east-west orientation, with the Holy of Holies in the west and the outer court to the east, just like with the Garden of Eden. And so this Mount Sinai actually was also aligned on the same east-west axis, with the mountain peak to the west and Israel camped on the east side. So this was like the temple for a year. Mount Sinai was the temple. Another interesting detail is that there was a river or brook that ran down the mountain, providing water for the people. It says that the brook that descended from the mountain. The whole point of the tabernacle is given in Exodus 25:8. Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them, according to all that I show you. That is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, so shall you make it. So God, you see, had made Mount Sinai his temple to meet with his covenant people. That functioned for a year, but it wasn't suitable for a permanent temple, because they were to go on their journey into the promised land. And so they needed a mobile sanctuary, which was the tabernacle, so he could dwell in their midst. And God dwelt in his tent in the midst, and the Israelites were camped all around him. And that's how it was for the next 40 years. And so, although the tabernacle was not built as a mountain, its origin was Mount Sinai, and it represented the same thing. And when the time came for them to camp before the Lord at Sinai came to an end, God moved his presence from the top of Mount Sinai into the Holy of Holies of the Tabernacle. And God told him, on the first day of the first month of the new year, set up that tabernacle of meeting. And Moses did that. And then when they dedicated it, the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of God would go onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, they did not journey till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout their journey. So God dwelt among them, you see, in his tabernacles. So he no longer spoke to them from the top of Mount Sinai, but from above his earthly throne, which was the mercy seat on top of the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. Because it says, God told them, put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark put the testimony, the 10 Commandments that I'll give you. And there above the mercy seat, I will meet with you. And I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim on the ark of the testimony, about everything that I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel. And so the Holy of Holies, with God seated on his throne, corresponds to the top of Mount Sinai, which is patterned after the first earthly temple, Mount Eden, and ultimately patterned on the heavenly temple, where God sits on his throne at the top of the mountain of God, the heavenly Mount Zion, from which flows the river of life. And in Hebrews 12, God compares the temporary mountain temple of Mount Sinai under the Old Covenant with the heavenly Mount Zion, to which we have access through the new covenant, through Jesus. It says, for you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and burnt with fire, Mount Sinai, and so on. But he says, but you have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. And so we see Mount Sinai was one of the temples of God, and then that got transformed into the tabernacle. Well, God bless you. Amen.
Thank you for watching. Join with us at Oxford Bible Church every Sunday at 11 AM Greenwich Mean Time for our live stream service. Or join us at Cheney School, Headington, Oxford, OX3 7QH. You can watch more of our teachings on our Roku channel and Derek Walker's YouTube channel. All Derek Walker's books are available in printed and Kindle versions in all Amazons worldwide, or online with other great products, where you can also support our programmes at www.oxfordbiblechurch.co.uk or by calling 01865 515 086.